Tackle Junkies, what's going on, everyone? Really appreciate you guys and gals for clicking on the video. Back with episode 4 of Rigs for Bigs. If you guys don't know, I've partnered up with MONSTERBASS, and every month I do a rigging gear video for the baits in the box. Now, I may not have every bait that you could have received or you may have received this month. These boxes are regional, so they do vary from place to place. So you may not get the same baits that I get. Okay, so it kind of just depends where you live as far as what bait you're going to receive. So we have a jerkbait here. These are from Livingston Lures. I do believe it's the first time Livingston is in the boxes here. So we have the Jerkmaster 121. And then we have the Schoolmaster, which can be worked at any depth, just like a jerkbait or a topwater. It'll have that side-to-side action, great for schooling fish. I would use fluorocarbon for both of these lures here, all right? A good happy medium, I would probably run 12-pound test. I like Seaguar and Vizex. It's a great fluorocarbon line. 12-pound test would be my choice of line for both of these. Okay. The jerkbait, it dives 4 to 6 feet, and like I said, this one here, it's got 30 foot on it. Right. You don't want to run too heavy of a pound test, just because your jerkbait or your crankbait, it won't reach its maximum depth with too heavy of a line. A heavy pound test or a line with a bigger diameter has got a lot of drag to it. So again, the lure may not be able to drag that heavier line down to reach max depth. So 12-pound test is a good happy medium. With treble hook lures, I'm sure you guys heard me say this a bunch in the past. Treble hook lures, I like a moderate action rod. So a real soft action, a soft tip rod, okay? That softer action, it allows the fish to get the bait, it keeps the fish pinned, and just helps you, fight the fish and land that fish, okay? A faster action rod, it'll still work, right? But they're not really made to land the fish, right? With treble hooks, okay? Just a quick example so you guys understand what I'm saying here. When a rod unloads, okay, when a rod is loaded up, so the tip is bent, right, when it unloads, if the tip is too stiff, you put a lot of pressure on those little hooks. Most of your jerkbaits and topwaters do have small little treble hooks. So using a stiffer action rod, there's a chance you could tear those out fairly easy. So the softer the rod with most treble hook lures, you have a better chance of landing that fish. But if you go to Tackle Warehouse or wherever it is you buy rods and you look at specs on some topwater or jerkbait rods, you may notice they have a faster action rod. Now, the deal with that, a faster action on a topwater or jerkbait rod, really allows you to work the bait with way less effort. And I believe they actually work better. There's been times where I'm throwing certain topwaters, and I'm like, man, that walks really well, or it pops really good, or whatever the case may be. And then it seems like the next day it's not working so well. That's because I'm using a different rod. And I realize when I'm using that faster action rod, that you just have, like the bait is more responsive just because the tip is stiffer, okay? Now, you may not land as many fish, but you can work that bait with way less effort, and it just works better. Okay, so keep in mind, if you do have a faster action rod, you may not land every bass, but it's probably going to be easier and your bait's going to work a bit better. Okay, you're using that downward motion for a topwater and a jerkbait. And with a faster action rod on a walking bait, I mean, I can barely just tick that rod. That tip's just barely moving, and that bait's working really good, right? With a softer action rod, the rod tip is absorbing that movement, so you're not really getting like a direct pull to the bait just because you have a lot of tip, if you guys understand that. So I don't want it to be too confusing, because I'm going to go, when I talk about crankbaits, I'm going to go to a moderate rod, right? Well, if crankbaits, you're basically just throwing them out and reeling them in, okay? But that topwater and jerkbait, you're using the rod to impart the action. So that faster action rod does help, like I said, give the baits better action. But like I said, you may not land every bass, okay? The one I'm using here, this is, you guys hear me talk about this rod all the time. This is the Okuma all-purpose. It's a 6'9", medium heavy, moderate fast action, okay? So it's not quite a moderate, it's not a true fast, it's right there, kind of in the middle. So it's still kind of soft, right? But it's not super stiff either. But it's fast enough to where I got great action out of my baits and I'm still landing majority of the bass. Okay, so really do like this rod for so many different things. It's my go-to spinnerbait rod, underspin rod. Love it for jerks and topwaters. I mean, this is a good all-around rod here for, you know, single hook moving baits or even topwaters and jerk baits and things like that. So 6'9", all-purpose Okuma TCS rod. For the reel, anytime I'm using the rod to work the bait, which you're doing that with a topwater and a jerk bait, the reel is just picking up slack. Okay, so in that situation, I like a 7-speed reel. This one here is the Luz Custom. It's in a 7.5 there. You know, usually I'm a 6-speed guy when I'm using the reel to work the bait, whether I'm winding a spinnerbait or a crankbait or whatever. But when the rod is used to work the bait, I like a 7-speed reel. Couple different crankbaits here. One from MONSTERBASS called the Square Banger. Dives 3 to 6 feet. And I do believe these you can only get in the boxes. I thought I heard Rick say he might put a few on the website, but I do believe you have to get a box to be able to get these colors right here. And then next up we have the Flatmaster from Livingston Lures, which dives 8 to 10 feet. So I'm going to use 2 different pound tests for these baits here, okay? Square bills, I normally run 15-pound Cigar in Vizex, okay? Fluorocarbon line. But in some cases, if I have a square bill like this one here, dives 3 to 6 feet, and I want to keep it like extra shallow, I may even run like 20-pound test mono, okay? For the most part, a shallow diving crankbait, the pound test really doesn't affect the action, okay? But it will affect the depth. So you can use the line for depth control. But for the most part, I do run a 15-pound test on my square bills, okay? Now, for the Flatmaster, diving 8 to 10 feet, you know, I don't believe you're going to get max depth on 15-pound test. A lure like this, normally you're going to want to run probably 10 to 12-pound test fluorocarbon. And keep in mind, you're going to need a good cast as well, a nice long cast as well, to be able to achieve that depth. So long cast, 10 to 12-pound test fluorocarbon would be your go-to on the Flatmaster. Okay, for the rod, this is a 7-foot, this is the Okuma Guide Select cranking rod. It's a medium power with a moderate fast action. Okay, so the power of the rod itself is a medium power, so it's not too stiff, plus it has a moderate fast action to it. So the rod overall is pretty soft, it's pretty limber, which is going to help you land more fish, okay? All my crankbaits, I like a softer rod in general, and definitely a softer action rod, okay? This one here, like I said, is 7-footer, so this one here will give you more than enough distance on the cast to get max depth on those crankbaits. For the reel, Bass Pro Shops Pro Qualifier 2 in a 6-speed, okay? This is a 6.8, but the gear ratios will change depending on brand. It might be a 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, 6.6, 6.8. Again, they're all different, but somewhere in that 6 range, especially when you're cranking. Let the reel do the work. A 6-speed reel has a ton of power, all right? The 6-speed reel for your crankbaits. Next up, spinnerbait from Castaic called the Atlas Spinnerbait, 3/8 of an ounce, chartreuse and white, double gold willow. Perfect color for this time of year. We're dealing with a lot of spring rains, which really muddies the water up. So great color here. I love the gold willows in muddy water. Line for a spinnerbait, I usually like 15 to 20-pound test fluorocarbon. Guys, I talk a lot about fluorocarbon. It's really what I use the most. But don't feel you have to use fluorocarbon. It definitely has its benefits, but if you have mono, if you can't afford fluorocarbon, or whatever the case may be, use what you want, use what you got. I'm just giving you guys an idea of, you know, what you could use and why I use it, right? But again, I like 15 to 20-pound test fluorocarbon. Cigar and Vizex is my go-to. And a great thing about Seaguar too is you can get away with using usually a heavier pound test than what you need, just because the diameter is pretty small, okay? But again, for the most part, 15 pound test fluorocarbon is what I'm using for my spinnerbaits. Normally I do not run a trailer, and I do not like a trailer hook. I would run it straight out of the package, just like it is. You know, a trailer hook can be pretty snaggy around, you know, cover, around brush and things like that. And normally a trailer, okay, will add lift, and I'm not really looking for any extra lift. You know, sometimes I'll put a trailer on with no action, all right, just because I'm looking for more bulk. But for the most part, I do just run them, no trailer hook. For the rod, this is the Akuma Serrano. It is the 610, all right? I like a much shorter rod when I'm spinnerbait fishing, just because I'm target fishing. I'm not really just throwing it out open water, trying to cover water. I'm looking for stumps and laydowns, you know, dock posts, things like that, and I'm more accurate with a bit shorter rod. So 610, it's a medium heavy with a moderate fast action. So plenty of power to hook the fish and get them in, and a nice soft action here to, you know, help me land the bass. So Akuma Serrano 610, medium heavy, mod fast. Now guys, like always, I go through different rods that you can use. But if you had like a medium fast action or like a medium heavy fast action, those are very versatile rods. Really, if you just had those couple rods, a medium fast and a medium heavy fast, you can do a ton of different things on those two rods, and just let the lure weight determine which one you're going to use. Obviously, put the lighter lures on the medium and the heavier lures on the medium heavy. But those are two really versatile rods. I'm trying to go a bit more in depth, but like I said, don't feel you have to have these specific rods to catch fish. Use what you got, but those two that I mentioned are very versatile rods. For the spinnerbait, 6-speed reel. And guys, I'm gonna make it pretty easy for you. Anytime I'm using the rod to work the bait, I like a 7. Really, any other reason, I like a 6, okay? So 6-speed reel is kind of my go-to, or it's my super versatile reel. I can do anything with it. I can speed it up or slow it down. But for really all my moving baits, 6-speed. I'm using the rod to work the bait, 7-speed. But if I'm strictly going to just pitch, that's when I'll go to like an 8-speed. But for the most part, 6 is where it's at for me. 6-speed reel. So last up, you may get some X-Zone soft plastics and some V&M jigs. Now these right here I ended up getting last month. This is the 3.25 Hot Shot Minnow, and I did a video on these, how to rig them and also how to spool a spinning reel. I'll link that video down below. Really, I'll link all of the rigs for bigs videos down below so you guys can check them all out. But I already did a rigging video on these. And here we have the 4-inch adrenaline bug, which is a beaver type bait. And I have the V&M, I do believe this is the skipping jig. The skipping jig here, these will match up perfectly, so I'll just go ahead and thread the adrenaline bug on the jig. Okay, so great little combo there. Line for the jig, okay, for a skipping jig, pitching jig, Texas rigs, really anything to where I'm pretty close to the fish. I'm going to use a bit heavier pound test. Not that I need it for the fish I'm catching, right? We know I'm not catching huge fish around here. But what I want heavier pound tests for is so it can absorb the shock. So if you're only, you know, 15, 20 foot from the fish, and let's say you're using 12-pound test, you set the hook, there's not a lot of line out to absorb the shock, right? So that 15, 17, 20-pound test can absorb that shock much better than a lighter pound test. On a cast, right, there's a ton of line out. So you can get away with a lighter pound test just because there's a lot more stretch in that amount of line. There's not going to be in only 15, 20 foot from you. So I like a heavier pound test to be able to absorb that shock a bit better and not break off. So this jig here, I would probably run, you know, 17-pound test. You could probably get away with 15. I'd probably run 17. I'd probably run 17. And you got to look at the diameter of the hook, of course, the size fish that you're around, the cover that you're around, and of course, the distance that you are away from the fish as well. 17-pound test, Seaguar, probably a Braze X is what I would run on this jig right here. For the rod, Akuma TCS jig worm rod. 7 foot, heavy power, moderate fast action. I like a bit shorter rod when I'm skipping. I'm more accurate with it, and my tip is not in the water. If I was open water jig fishing, I'd be using like a 7.3 or a 7.4. But for skipping, I do like that 7-footer. Okay, heavy power, so plenty of power to set the hook, and if you're around cover, to get the fish out of cover before they get you wrapped up in it. So 7 foot, heavy, mod fast, TCS jig worm rod. For the reel, 7 speed. For the most part, I'm using the rod to work the bait, or I'm trying to get the bait back to me as quick as I can to make another skip. So I like a 7-speed reel for those situations. Well guys, that should wrap it up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to smash the thumbs up. And guys, hopefully you guys are enjoying these videos. I enjoy making them. I love the gear talk, and hopefully you guys do as well. So anyways guys, love you. We will see you guys on the next one.